Hey there, everybody. We are back again with another showcase on another fun deck that has really kind of taken the scene at our locals here, and that is Kentaurosmon. And, I think Kentaros is a pretty underrated deck, particularly in the upcoming Ultimate Cup, where I think it can do some damage. This deck is really a shout out to my buddy Shane, who has really championed this deck and really sort of made it his own, really was the inspiration into helping me have fun with this deck as well, having played a lot against it and sort of bouncing ideas back and forth with one another, trying to make the deck of Ken work. And also shout out to TJ for helping me test and just really flesh out these ideas and giving me pointers along the way. I really think this deck is an accumulation of what we have worked on, over the past month or so together. So, this one's for you guys. Hope everybody else enjoys. And without further ado, let's get into it. All right. So, to start off with our eggs, we're going to be running 4 of the new BT13 Kentaurosmon. Your turn, once per turn, when a card is removed from your security stack, you can give one of your Digimon jamming. Synergizes very well with what this deck wants to do. You're constantly manipulating your security and trashing to proc effects from various options, your Tamers and your top end. So, getting jamming is, I think, just an added benefit to, again, just an added benefit to the synergy with this deck. I was considering running the EX4 Koromon, the one where if you suspend a Tamer, you can neg an additional 1k DP. Sometimes that came up, but I just felt like I really wanted to see the jamming a lot more, which is why I'm running the Kentaurosmon over the Koromon. Next, for our level 3s, we are starting off with 4 of the new Kudamon from BT13, sort of your generic searcher for the deck. You reveal top 3, you can pick up 1 card with Vaccine and 1 Yellow Tamer from those hits. With the deck and how it's set up, you're probably going to have at least 1 hit with this search. And then you can get, both a Vaccine and a Tamer most of the time as well, with how many Tamers you're running and how many Vaccines you're running. So we're really using it for the search. The Inheritable's not bad. When attacking, if there are fewer of 6 total security between the two of you, meaning that 6 total between your stack and your opponent's stack, you can neg additional 2 KDP to one of your opponent's Digimon. Again, can pop up sometimes, but you're really using this card for the search. And the next level 3 we're running is 4 of the promo Kudamon. A very good card in the sense that, again, with the synergy, right, you're trashing a whole lot from your security stack, which lets you proc your effects off, but also does put you in a pretty vulnerable spot at times, right? Where if you've trashed too much, you put yourself in a more precarious situation. This Kudamon on play lets you just recover one if you can bottom deck a Kentaros from trash. So a lot of times, like late game, if you just want to slam this Kuda down, you bottom deck a Kentaurosmon, you recover one, you can buy yourself a little bit more time to, kind of stall out and then go for lethal when you can. Inheritable's not bad. On deletion, one of your opponent gains negative 1k DP. But like I said with the other Kudamon, you're really using it for the on-play effect, which is the recovery here. And that'll do it for the level 3s. The level 4s, we're running our typical hybrid package. So we're going to just be running 4 of the Kazemon from BT7. Digivolve for 2 on top of a Yellow Tamer. Sort of bread and butter hybrid. Not much else to say about it. And then we're running 4 of the Zephyr on top of that. Again, just typical hybrid package right there. Zephyr does Digivolve on top of Kaze potentially for 1. So if you're cycling or looking for pieces, you can always do that for a 1 cost. And then if you have a card with hybrid in its traits or a Zoe in the stack, you can buff up your security by plus 3k DP, which, can come up at times. If you have the Zoe in stack with the Zoe Inheritable, you can even buff up security up to a total of 6k DP, which is not insignificant in some matchups. So I think just classic hybrid package right there. For level 5s, we are going to round out the hybrids with 1 of Jet Sylphie from BT7. Lets you Digivolve on top of your hybrid stack for 1. It is a 3 cost to hard Digivolve, which most of the times you'll never do. As you're going into it, you recover 1. It's limited for a reason, right? Just a very good card for recovery, for tempo purposes as well. Last level 5 we're running are 4 of the BT2 Rise Greymons. This one is when Digivolving, you get to play a yellow Tamer out without paying its play cost, which with the amount of Tamers we're running, most of the times you will get a hit from it. Its inheritable is also very good. If you have 3 or more yellow Tamers in play, you get security check +1, which is not insignificant, especially with what our top end can do. Getting that +1 check really gives you that tempo and the aggression to really put pressure on your opponent and close out games sort of out of left field. So I really like this Rise Gray in terms of the level 5. There aren't really other level 5s I would consider running in this. Part of me considered maybe the BT8 Shakomon, which lets you recover 1, and then the inheritable to -3 KDP when swinging. It's a thought, right? But deck space is kind of tight with this deck. So I think having 4 of these guys and the Jet Sylphie is enough room that I have for my level 5s. I would consider maybe sneaking a 1 or 2 of the BT8 Shakomon if I can find the room, but I just felt like it's just, at that point, you're sacrificing too much, and I really like I said, the check +1 from this to kind of give you that extra aggression. So I'd much rather have this as opposed to the Shakomon there. Moving on to our level 6s, we've got 2 of the original OG Kentaurosmon from BT3. Not only being a very pretty shiny gold card, its Digivolving effect is pretty good as well. Up to 5 of your opponent's Digimon will gain check -2 until the end of their turn. Caveat being that, if you're playing against these big single stack decks, sometimes that effect is sort of a moot point because there's nothing on the field to give neg checks to. But if you do play against sort of a wide board, decks such as like Bloom Lord, Royal Knights, whatever it may be, check -2 for up to 5 is pretty darn good. On deletion, which will catch a lot of people off guard, is that when this card gets deleted, you get to neg 11 KDP on one of your opponent's Digimon, which can be a pretty significant number, right? That might be enough to clear out a big body. So definitely, I think an undervalued card. And a cheap Evo is also like sort of the cherry on top with it. So I think a good 2 of. Next, we are running 4 of the new Kentaurosmon. As good as the other one is, I think this is just that much better. I think it's a very, very underappreciated card in this current meta and kind of slept on. On play and when Digivolving, if there are 6 or fewer total cards between you and your opponent's security stack, you get to reveal a yellow card from your hand. Can be a Digimon, can be an option, can be a Tamer, whatever. But as long as it's yellow, you get to put it on the top of your security stack and gain 3 memory, meaning that you've effectively gone into Kentauros for a 2 cost, right? So most often, if you're doing that, you're keeping turn by going into Kentauros. So then when attacking, and this is a once per turn, you can trash the top card of security, you can neg -7 KDP on one of your opponent's Digimon, and then unsuspend Kentauros. So you can really manipulate your security to hit those like 8 targets in this deck that when they're trashed from security, they proc effect. So you can really manipulate it that way, and you can really just, I think do a whole lot with just 1 turn and 1 Digivolution. And as I said before, with Kyaramon trashing security or removing a card from security, well, now you have a 13k that's swinging jamming, potentially 2 checks with jamming if you have your Rise Greymon underneath and the right setup. Unsuspend, swing another 2 checks jamming, now you've effectively cleared security at that point, right? So this card can do a whole lot with the right sort of setup and the right board state. You also have to keep in mind that going into Kentauros too early can also hurt you a lot, right? If you go into Ken too early, you have to do a 5-cost Digivolve. If you have more than 6 total security, then you're not going to be able to put something on top. You're not going to gain the memory, and it's just sort of Ken will just sit there, right? It's a 5 cost to not really do a whole lot. So you really want to be timing your Digivolution appropriately, which is where, spoiler alert, one of our Tamers will allow us to just bypass the building the stack route and warp into Kentauros, which I think gives you very good value. So I think 4 of this new Kentauros is a must. To wrap up our Digimon, we are running 1 of Jesmon GX. I think this is a nice tech. I think if you want to replace this with either another option, another tamer, or just another consistency piece, like for example, like another level 5, I think it's totally reasonable. But I think, if you're able to get into GX, like it's going to be a very, very hard time for your opponent to get rid of it. And you just really put the pressure on like, hey, solve this. Otherwise, I have game next turn, right? So when Digivolving, you may place 1 card with Royal Knights in its trait from, and a play cost of 13 or less from your hand or trash, right? As a Digivolution source. If you do that, you get to proc one of its 1 Digivolving effects, and then you get Blitz. So for example, right, if you're able to go into Kentaro or go from Kentauros into GX, and you have another Kentauros to slip underneath, you can proc the 1 Digivolving effect again, right? More often than not, now you have less than 6 or fewer again. You reveal another card from your hand, put it on top, and you get to essentially recover, swing with GX, with piercing, with blocker, and with +1 security check. Because you have multiple Royal Knights, you're going to be able to proc, a lot of those effects, and it has, it's just a big swing, big numbers, and they have to get rid of this guy now, right? So I just think it's just so good value for the end game where you're just like, look, deal with this, right? If you can't deal with this, well, I'm going to be going for game next turn. So forces them to either commit a lot of resources, forces them to commit a lot of just time and effort to removing it, which then basically gives you the tempo to kind of go for game again, right? And of note too, before I forget, the GX gives you +1 check for each Royal Knight in trait. So by having 2 Kentauros in the stack, you're checking +3 with this guy. So just keep that in mind. So definitely like a win more button. You can win without it, but I do think GX is a pretty good sort of closer in that sense. Now, moving on to our Tamers, we're going to be running 3 Zoe. For those who don't know, on play, you get to search your security, take out a hybrid. If you do, you get to recover 1. And then inheritable is your security Digimon gain +3 KDP during your opponent's turn. So it's good for cycle. I think what's going to be important for this deck in general is just being able to cycle and manipulate your security so that you can kind of get what you want in it and set up for your big plays, right? You don't want to be stuck in a security situation where like you just don't know what's in there. You're kind of stuck with sort of useless stuff in security that you can't synergize with what you want to do. You want to be constantly just trying to cycle as much as you can. So I think Zoe is definitely a card that enables that. Speaking of cycling security, kind of staple yellow tamer here with TK. Again, lets you do the exact same thing, except now you're not just limiting yourself to a hybrid. You can just pick up any sort of yellow card, which is the entirety of this deck. You pick up a yellow card, you recover 1, and then it's a memory setter as well. So 2 TK I think is essential. I don't think you run it at any less. I think any more, it starts to get a little clunky. I can see the argument for maybe running TK at 3, but I found that the happy medium for me was at a 2 of. Because we had to make room for this card here. It is an expensive play cost, like a hard play, right? But the value that you can get out of this tamer here is just huge, right? Start of your turn, if you have fewer security cards than your opponent, you gain 2 memory. So early game, if you have 1 or 2 of these guys out there, you really force your opponent to be like, hey, do I really want to swing, right? Because if I do swing, I could guarantee my opponent at least 3, 5, sometimes 7 memory, which is just insane, right? Like, it's a very scary thought being like, wow, I could just pass turn and now my opponent has all the resources in the world to work with and set up, right? So I just think that this card gives you so much value, which is why I want to run it at a 3 of. 4 I think is too much just because it is, like I said, a 4 cost and a little expensive to play. But I think 3 ensures that you will be seeing it and getting at least 1 or 2 out, per match. You can also suspend it when attacking to neg 1 KDP on one of your opponent's Digimon, which, if set up right, can be important, but I think the memory gain is truly why this card is just so good for this deck. Because think about it, right? Like, you're constantly trashing security, so you can manipulate it to a point where you will be below your opponent. And then last but not least, we are running 4 of the Richard Sampson, or as I like to call him, Richie Rich from BT13. He is one of those targets that I talked about where if it's trashed from security, you can just go ahead and play it. So you can go ahead and play it out of security if it's trashed or if it's checked. And start of your main phase, if there's 6 or fewer total security cards between you and your opponent, you gain a memory. So if multiple of these guys are out, you're gaining a ton of memory off of that. And then main phase, if, again, there are 6 or fewer, that 6 number or fewer, you can suspend this Tamer to warp one of your Kudamon into a Kentaurosmon for the Digivolution cost, which still has very good value, right? And we'll go, like I said, we'll go over a combo play a little bit later, can kind of like give you an ideal scenario of what this deck wants to do. But being able to warp late game into a Kentauros is honestly a very good play and really lets you kind of set up for a very explosive one at that too. So I think you have to run 4 of Richard here. Moving on to our options, we run 1 Blinding Ray. Again, security manipulation can be helpful. If you're just missing that threshold of 6 or fewer, you can just Blinding Ray to get you there. You can gain a memory, or gain 2 memory, and kind of extend your plays that way. Sometimes I felt like running at it like at a 2 or 3 was just a little clunky. Like, I was just seeing it more often than not, and I didn't want to see it in security. I didn't want to see it in hand because I felt like I'd be doing too much. So I think 1 is just nice just as a tech of, just to say, hey, if I need to manipulate security, there's that option there. We are running 1 Reinforcing Memory Boost. People will say, well, like, if the point is to trash security, like, do you really want to be going back up? Yes, that is a very good question, but I do think, to be devil's advocate, if you are trashing a lot, you are putting yourself at risk for that lethal swing. And what Reinforcing is able to do is, like, you reveal top 2, you get to choose 1 and put it on top, which synergizes very well with, for example, a Kentauros play or whatever it may be to, swing, trash, and restand, trash, proc effect possibly. And then that 3 extra memory that you can get from this is still very valuable, particularly in the late game. So I feel like this is still a must inclusion, for any yellow deck, particularly any sort of yellow hybrid deck. Next option we're running is, I think, one of the best removal cards in the game. This is BT10 Lonky Adestacto. I just ran it at 4 because, the more I thought about it, the more I'm just like, what? I just don't want to deal with people's big stacks, right? And with our ability to manipulate security to a T, more often than not, you are finding yourself in that sweet spot where you can proc both of this effect. So most of the times this isn't going to proc with the Pulsemon thing, where basically they're saying, if you have a Pulsemon or Digimon with Pulsemon and it's Digivolution cards, you can play without, meeting its color requirements. We're a pure yellow deck. You're going to be playing this regardless, and we don't have any Pulsemon. So that part doesn't matter. But the main effect is if you have 3 or more security cards, one of your opponents gets minus 12 KDP. So even if we're sitting at more than 3 security, you are able to just potentially just negate 12k on something, delete it, great. Now, if you're at 3 or fewer security cards, you can take one of your opponent's Digimon and place it face down on top of their security stack. So notice how 3 is included in both. So if you're able to manipulate your security to where you have 3, you can do this both ways, right? You can neg 12k on one card, and you can take one card and put it on top of security, effectively taking apart 2 big stacks in one go. And this card is just a huge win, I think. Even if it's just sitting in hand and you're like, look, I don't really have a play, but they have a big guy on board, just Lonky, get rid of the guy, right? So I just think it just synergizes very well with this deck. So with how many big guys are running around, with Mirage Galgamon running rampant both in BT13 regular competition and Ultimate Cup format, Belphemon, etc. Like, they're swinging in. Sometimes you just want to be like, hey man, Lonky, bye, see you later. And then the bread and butter of what this deck wants to do, Odin's Breath from BT13. So this card, when it's trashed from security, you get to proc its effect, which is exactly what Kentauros will do. So if you have an Odin's Breath in hand, you go ahead and reveal it, you put it on top of security stack, and then you proc Kentauros's when attacking to trash, meaning Odin's Breath will proc. And when it does that, one of your opponents gains minus 3k DP, and then all of your opponents' Digimon gain -1 check until the end of their turn. So this is not like, oh, like everything that's on the field right now gets -1 check. The little guy in raising, he's fine, or the hybrid is fine. No, it's a blanket -1 security. So once this is active, anything they introduce onto the field gets -1 security check, which is extremely suffocating and extremely frustrating to play against and play around, just because it's just so good. And on top of that, if it just is checked from security, meaning that something just swings into it, you proc the main effect anyway. So if this is in security, it's always going to proc, unless you just recover it. But if it gets checked in security, or if it gets trashed from security, Odin's is going to proc. Your opponent cannot get around it. So you want to be able to manipulate your security as much as possible to get Odin's in it and just kind of constantly just suffocate your opponent that way. It's just such a good card, particularly in this meta where you have a lot of things like swing in. Belphemon likes to unsuspend and restand and swing. Mirage Gal likes to restand and swing, and Bloom likes to wideboard. So getting a blanket -1 security check on your opponent's field is just so huge and can really just stall you out that one turn that you need to then go for lethal. So I just think that this card is just, so good and provides so much value. So that's the deck. How about we take a little bit of a break and let's talk about a combo, or like how to set up your board and what you want to be able to do with this deck. All right. So keep in mind that this is a very idealized board state, right? But this is sort of the idea of just showcasing what this deck can do. So, say your opponent's past turn, you have your TK memory setter out, you've got 1 TK Kari and then 2 Richie Rich out. To start turn by pushing up, you're going to gain, at this point, if there's a total of less than 6 in security total amongst the both of you, you'll gain 2 memory because you have 2 Richard Sampsons out. You'll gain 2 memory off of the TK Kari, which automatically pushes you up to 7 memory, right? So that's sort of that discussion we had earlier where, this deck really gives you a lot of memory to work with and really pushes your opponent to make those tough decisions when swinging and whatnot. So say you go ahead and do this. You start off at 7. You can go about 2 ways, I think, of approaching this, right? First way you can approach it is going into your hybrid Rise Gray route. So what you can do here is using TK Kari, go into a Kazemon for 2, putting you at 5 memory. And then you can go into a Rise Greymon for 3, putting you at a total of 2 memory. say you don't have a Tamer to play, that's okay. You're still at sort of your sweet spot of 3 Tamers on board, which will then allow you to go into BT13 Kentaurosmon for initially a cost of 5. By proccing its on Digivolving effect, you can reveal a yellow card from your hand, which will be Odin's Breath here. Place it at the top of security, which will then gain you back 3 memory, essentially making a Kentauros a 2 cost to Digivolve. By doing that, now you've kept turn. You're back at 0, or you're back at 0 memory. You are then able to swing 2 checks, proc its 1 attacking effect to trash the top card of security, which is Odin's Breath. Now, because Odin's Breath was trashed, you can now activate its main effect, which is to give a Digimon minus 3 KDP on your opponent's side of the field, and they get that blanket minus 1 security check till the remainder of their to the end of their next turn, right? Because you trashed, you are able to restand. The checks that go through, you'll be swinging for 2 checks because you have the 3 Tamers. Now we'll be with jamming, because Kentaurosmon will proc. As you have removed a card from security, you can choose to give one of your Digimon jamming, so we'll give that to Kentauros. Kentauros has now swung 2 checks with jamming. Say that it lives. You can go ahead and swing again for 2 checks with jamming. And that's now you're brought them down to 1 security, right? In theory, if they've had a total of 5. Now, more often than not, you probably would have had early chip damage, which means this Kudamon can, in theory, potentially swing for game. Now, if for whatever reason you haven't had that chip damage and you're struggling to have that last bit of memory, if you happen to have Blinding Ray, great. You can trash security to gain 2 memory and then go into a hybrid for gameplay right there, right? But like I said, more often than not, you have already chipped, 1 or 2 checks, causing them to pretty much be lethalized by the Kudamon swing after you've done your 4 checks with Kentauros. So that's one route you can take. Another route you can take potentially is to say, okay, look, we're not going to do the Kazemon Rise Gray play. We are going to go ahead and at the start of main, after you've promoted, we're going to go ahead and say, look, we have that sweet spot now, which is 6 or fewer total. We'll go ahead and suspend Richard Samson to just go ahead and warp into a Kentauros. By warping into Kentauros, you can still proc the effect, so you would go ahead and reveal Odin's Breath from hand, put it at the top of security, making it again a 2-cost Digivolution. And now you're at 5 memory, you go ahead, swing Kentauros, proc effect to trash Odin's Breath, proccing Kyaromon's effect to give it jamming. You restand. You can go ahead, swing again with jamming. So now you've done 2 checks jamming. Now you sort of have a myriad of options, right? You can go ahead and just kind of play out your hybrids and maybe do some pokes here and there late game, which hopefully at that point in time, you've gotten enough memory where you can chip earlier and then that double hybrid play can be more viable for lethal. Sometimes you can continue just playing out Tamers, playing out resources where they're sort of stuck now, right? Because they have Odin's Breath in play, they can't go for security. They sort of have to deal with Kentauros one way or another, meaning that they've got to commit the resources to destroying it. Otherwise, next turn, you've got a lot of potentiality to just do it all over again, right? So the warp really allows you to get into your mega, and really put pressure on your opponent and also manipulate your security in a way where, it's really frustrating for them to be like, they're right there. They have the play they want to do, but now you've got Odin's Breath in play and, you've slowed them down an additional turn and really messed up their plans that way. So this is sort of what the deck can do. Obviously, right, this is a very ideal scenario, ideal board state, but this is the potential for the deck. So I really have fun playing this deck. I really think it's a nice counter meta or anti-meta deck that you can have fun with and actually do relatively well with. I do think that in the Ultimate Cup format, this could be a good dark horse candidate to make some waves. And, you know, I'd be interested to see with a good pilot, like how far this can really go. Still a lot of testing to be done on my end, you know, still a lot of ratios to work out, but I'm very excited to see how far this deck goes. As always, the photo should have been at the beginning of the video, and then the deck photo itself will also be linked in the description down below. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will see you on the next one. Bye.